Hello, family. How you doing? This is Ghostwriter 615, and true to my word, I'm going to try to keep coming up with some dirty little secrets from Dr. Claude Anderson's book, Dirty Little Secrets about Black history, its heroes, and other troublemakers. And this one is about compulsory ignorance. Throughout the slavery period, blacks were subjugated to compulsory ignorance. Laws and societal customs forbade teaching slaves how to read or write. So learning became incidental to whatever task they were performing in and around the plantations. The 1860 census reported national literacy rates of 55% for whites and approximately 1% for all blacks. National public schools were mandated by law after the Civil War, but they were profoundly different in both quality and quantity between whites and blacks. The country needed new schools to educate and acculturate the large number of European immigrants and their children who were pouring into the country. As the national economy expanded, it generated white-collar and semi-skilled jobs for these new citizens. The opposite was true for Black Americans who were still subordinate and outside of the social system. Worse, following emancipation, no measures were taken to identify and correct the psychological, social, economic, and educational damage that 260 years of slavery and abuse had inflicted on the black race. The dominant society pretended that slavery had never happened, while a peonage system was being prepared for blacks. The new public policy introduced them into separate and inferior public schools. But even under these poorest of educational conditions, blacks were able to reduce their illiteracy rate from 98% in the mid-1860s to 40% by 1900 and to just 20% by 1920. By overcoming centuries of planned ignorance and inferior schools, black educational achievement far exceeded that of the newly arriving European immigrants who received first-class citizenship with better schools. The 10 million European immigrants who arrived in this country in the decade following the Civil War had an illiteracy rate of approximately 95%. By 1900, black ex-slaves had reduced their illiteracy rate twice as fast as European immigrants who had access to much better educational resources. This was an excerpt from Dr. Claude Anderson's book on compulsory ignorance. And I have another item I'd like to share with you. It's about changing my narrative. And I start off by talking about what's the difference between a story and a narrative. And the reason why I say this is because for so long, the black community has had someone else to tell them how to think, how to live, what schools to put their children in, and we have to change this. Basically, a story is an account of incidents and events. A narrative is how a story is told. As with most writing, the main factor in understanding the difference between a story and a narrative comes through context. How I got here. How do you get over 5 decades of your life and someone else is always writing your narrative for you? It is almost like someone else is living in my mind and I follow their directions. That's lunacy. When I say I had to get here, I'm saying that no one else is going to write my narrative anymore. Now, they can print whatever they want and they can write it from their perspective. That's their prerogative. But I won't be living their story anymore. and I will be writing my own version of my narrative. I deserve to live my own story, write my own story, and do my very best to make it happen. We all do. Some of us would just like to keep following someone else because that way they feel like they have no responsibility in their failure. But that's a lie. You are responsible for your failures after you reach adulthood. It doesn't matter who you follow and about the past. This is not the time to be quiet, and I hope that others hear what I'm trying to say, because our people have been quiet for too long, and what has that got us? Do you want more out of life? Do you have the courage to go get it? We are responsible for what happens to us, even if we don't have the strength, courage, and intellect to stop what happened to us. We had a choice, live or die. Some Africans, when they arrived to America, simply walked into the ocean. The inspiration for writing this came because sometimes if you don't do it, it doesn't get done. Sometimes you're sitting down on the bench and you need to get into the game. This is my entry into the game of life. Real life is not a game, but that's what we call it. When we live it, we need to live it to win it. I have not done so thus far, and that irks me. I have been conditioned to believe that I came from nothing, that I am nothing, and I know that's a lie. I've always known that's a lie, but irregardless, that's what I was taught. That's what I was made to believe. And while we think we're sending our kids to these schools so they can get an education, do we ask what type of education are they getting? What are they being exposed to? And how they are being treated at those institutions of higher learning, as they call them? And I'm not talking about 18-year-olds. I'm talking about your young ones. You know, you look at those teachers like they're supposed to love your children, but if your children don't look like the teacher, what motivates that teacher to want to look out for them and teach them about their history and to take care of them better than someone who looks like them? In fact, it appears and seems like everything that I've been taught, especially about me, was a lie. Who knows my story, your story, or his story better than we do? So why have others been writing our story? Is it that they want to lay down the plans for us to live them out? Or are we foolish enough to keep doing that because that's what we have been doing so far? And if you do not know who I'm talking about, just look in the mirror and it will tell you all you need to know. After you face yourself, make sure that you do your self-history. I won't go into detail about this, but we need to face who we are as a person, and we need to deal with all that garbage that we have and we've been carrying around for years. Once you do so, then you can move on. You'll be a better man or woman for doing so. Hopefully, then you can live and face the present and know who you are, and you can be comfortable with yourself and others. There are so many external pressures, noise, and distractions that render us helpless to be who we are, truly are. But be who you are regardless, and let's change the narrative. There is a question that has been nagging me for quite some time. That is, what can we do? This seems to be the one thing that crops up every time we start thinking and talking about building a black nation. So, in my mind, I say change your narrative first. He who owns the past also has charge of the present and the future also. In order to affect change, you have to change the way the story is being told, is presented, and have access to broadcast media services. For example, black people are always presented to the world as perpetrators. So how do we change that narrative to reflect and get the support we need for people to see that black people have been victimized? Well, you first have to change the way people see black people. Over several hundred years, there has been a concerted effort to change the way people see anything black. Black has been associated with evil, darkness, negativity, while white has always seemed to represent purity, success, and positive outcomes. To change the narrative, we have to first know our audience. This perception of black people did not happen over just a few years, and it will take some time to change that, but it can be done. One way to do so is to cut the negative images presented to the audience. Why is that when media shows most black people, especially in difficult or traumatic times, the media chooses someone who may not be the best to represent our nation of black people? Most often they choose someone who may favor the images of Mammy from the slavery era, someone who reflects a negative image of our community and is not the right fit for their agenda and perception of the black community. Rarely do you see the media find someone like Michelle Obama on the news representing black people. Mrs. Obama would not serve as a good image to reflect negativity in the black community because she is well-spoken and the conversation would lead to a positive outcome. So she is not a good black candidate because she doesn't project negativity and is not an example of joblessness, nor is she poor. She does not present a good example of marginalized black people in America. What she does is immediately change the narrative. She knows how to tell a story, and she would effectively change the narrative. What do you tell yourself about who you are? What stops you from doing what you really want to do? Why are you not doing what you really want to do? These are some of the questions that I've asked myself and I've had to face, and sometimes I didn't have a good answer. I realized a lot of things that I believed in or that I've heard, I've done so without researching the truth of the matter. I don't do that anymore. I research and I try my best to get the most accurate information that I can, not only for you, but especially for me. I realize that researching the truth of the matter is the best thing that I could do for all people concerned. But at one time, I didn't even research the person who told me, and I am not talking or making a distinction between family, friend, or foe. When I took an honest look at the things that I used to tell myself, I was disappointed. I was disappointed because I had to ask myself one question: who taught you to hate yourself? Now, why do I say that? I say that because I look at my situation, finances, job, and other things in my life, and I realize that I am telling myself the wrong story. Someone who was telling themselves the right story would not live like this. They would not take whatever comes their way and be satisfied with it. So I decided that I'm going to tell myself a new story. This story will edify and build me up, and I don't need anyone else to do that for me. I can do that for myself. My spirit says, "What took you so long?" End of message. I wrote that maybe a decade ago, and I realized that we have to take control of our mind. You know, they refer to this environment that we live in as the matrix. Well, when you don't know the truth about yourself, sometimes you allow yourself to be taken advantage of. And the only one who can change that is you. I hope that you find some nugget or jewel of education and our history in this. I am Ghostwriter 615. Thank you. If you don't mind, if I'd like to hear some feedback, like, share, subscribe. It would be nice to hear your comments. Thank you.